So Larry David, someone I will be upfront with you about, was really cool to me. When I was a cab driver, one of the funniest experiences of my life is I was driving a cab, and I got a call from Patty McKeever, who had a brother, Al McKeever. They were both national treasures. They were redheads, twins, boy and girl. Patty was the booker at Caroline's at the time. She worked for a guy, Louis Ferranda, who was, I believe, a gay Italian or a Latino man, but he had great, hey, what's going on, Failla? I saw your little skit the other night. Not so bad. You know, you're doing all right for a fat guy. You know, he would talk to you like that. It was great. It was old showbiz, you know. But anyway, one morning, in a wild confluence of events, my buddy Dean and I were actually watching a Larry David interview where he talked about being a cab driver. It's like he used to be a cab driver back in the day. He ran into one of his buddies, and he had this woman he drove on the regular who was really rich and always demanded that he wear a chauffeur hat when he drove her around. And Larry had told this story in the interview about how he came to realize she was kind of blind and had no idea if he was actually wearing the hat. So she'd get in and be like, do you have your hat on? And he'd be like, yeah, I got my hat. Yeah, don't worry, the hat's on. Don't worry. And he just drove down the street with no hat on, you know, that funny little victories when you're pushing back against an abusive, wealthy employer. But that day, as Dean and I had watched an interview with Larry David 4 a.m. before I left for my taxi garage at 5. You know the story if you listen to the show every day. I was driving a taxi in New York City from 5 a.m. to 5 p.m. So every day at 3:30, I would meet up with my buddy Dean, and we'd write. We'd write comedy, we'd write screenplays, we'd write whatever we could, because we knew as guys that were trying to make it in showbiz, we weren't going to have anything left at the end of a 12-hour shift of cab driving, getting cut off and shot at, and people swinging screwdrivers at your head. You're meeting ghosts and time travelers and hobbits, all kinds of wild malfeasance in New York City. So anyway, after watching his interview that morning, about 3 in the afternoon, when I was driving back from JFK International Airport, I got a call from Patty McKeever at Caroline's, and she was like, hey, here's a crazy story. Jeff Garland is in town this weekend. We need an opening act, but I just want to give you a heads up that Larry David might be there, because he was in town filming a Woody Allen movie called Whatever Works down in Washington Square Park. And he was like, he's been showing up to all of Jeff's shows this weekend with Richard Kind from Curb Your Enthusiasm. Susie Essman's been there. In fact, Robin Williams was still alive, and he was a guy who had a presence at those shows. So I was like, God, Patty, that's so crazy. I was just watching a Larry David interview this morning. What are the odds that that I'm going to run into him tonight? That would be the funniest thing. So I called up my buddy Dean. It kind of blew his mind, but we showed up to Caroline's that night, and the first guy we saw in the green room, Larry David. Really cool. And I gave Larry David a lot of credit at the time, because he heard me talking about cab driving and was like, oh, you drove a cab? I used to drive a cab. Oh, my God. And I was like, wow, Larry David. What a relatable guy. What a billionaire who still sees life through the lens of the little guy.
Wrong.
My goodness gracious. So the op-ed, if you're willing to fast forward, legitimately 17 years in the conversation, because that's back when Jenny was pregnant with Lincoln. So it was, 08, 09, and he was born in 08. So about 17 years, if my community college math serves me right. Larry David wrote an op-ed in the New York Times that's going over well on the left, but really is embarrassing. The op-ed is basically his attempt to lampoon Bill Maher for meeting with President Trump at the White House. And the op-ed is about his dinner with the Fuhrer. And essentially what he wrote in satire was how, Hitler was the devil, and I always thought he was the worst guy in the world, and I'd always told people he was the worst guy in the world. But then one day I showed up to dinner with him, and he was a completely different guy. He was funny. He wasn't like the guy on TV. I didn't hate him as much as I had hated him from afar, and having gotten to know him, I realized it was okay. And this was basically his take on Bill Maher's explanation of meeting with Trump. It comes from this Hollywood mindset of our feelings are facts, and anybody in violation of our feelings is factually a terrible person. And that's what Larry David and the 3 people who still use the New York Times instead of making it part of the litter box for their cat, are actually coming to grips with right now. They want to believe that Bill Maher is normalizing Hitler by having some type of dinner with Donald Trump. But do you understand, again and again and again, I cannot imagine being Jewish, okay, and not knowing the difference between the guy who might have killed 10 million of my people and the guy who might have killed 10 million Big Macs. But that's the difference between Trump and Hitler. Donald Trump is currently heading up the Department of Government Efficiency, which is aimed at shrinking the size and strength of the federal government. Hitler was trying to make his government so big and omnipotent, he would rule the world in its entirety, creating a master race along the way and vowing to kill anyone who wasn't a part of it. Does anyone maybe notice a difference between that and Trump wanting to cut your taxes and secure the border? Okay, because I do. And the fact that Larry David, a guy who I thought was like, wow, this is a smart guy. He gets it. He's a man of the people. He's above the garbage. There's a few things burning his balls. One, Cheryl Hines, his TV wife on Curb Your Enthusiasm, is married to RFK. And although she said when RFK became part of the Trump ticket and ultimately a future member of his cabinet, that I don't support Trump, but I support my husband, and I think there needs to be a distinction. She has since become a regular fixture at Mar-a-Lago and all the big Trump media events, and like everybody else who gets to know Trump, all they really do is go, oh, I get it, we've been lied to on TV. And that's the end result of where we are with a lot of people on the left. Bill Maher didn't go meet Trump and find a different guy than the one he sees on TV. He just realized if you're not telling everybody that laughing at jokes and being a little crass and pugnacious is Hitler stuff, in the presence of just you and him, you realize, wow, it's the same. And Bill Maher wanted to tell you that, wow, it turns out the guy on TV is not the guy I met, because he's basically just trying to cover his own ass because he's embarrassed because he realizes he fed into this insane narrative. Okay, and you know who else fed into this insane narrative? Larry David.
Bingo, man, bingo.
Larry David was on Saturday Night Live with Trump 5 years ago. Donald Trump hosted Saturday Night Live in an election year. Okay, excuse me, maybe it was 9 years ago. I want to get that right because it was the 2016 election. And he was on with him. And Trump was doing the opening monologue, and they played a sketch where Larry David came out and pretended he was one of those idiots that calls Trump a racist. And he was actually making fun of the people he has now become. And that really is a teachable moment. You know, if you hate something long enough, you become it. Okay, and in a roundabout way, Larry David has. And he's like Howard Stern before him, a guy who was fine with Trump. I mean, Howard had him on a show every week. And a couple of things really bothered him. The big one being, okay, that yes, they don't always get their way, which is something they're not used to in Hollywood. But the bigger one being that Trump is so much more famous, so much more relevant, and has a much better relationship with his fans than an out-of-touch Hollywood celebrity ever will. And that's also the thing that burns his balls about Cheryl Hines. Larry David thought they could stomp their feet about RFK being involved with Trump, and that would be the end of RFK being involved with Trump, because Cheryl Hines would put pressure on him and they wouldn't want to upset the elites in Hollywood. But what Larry David doesn't understand is the elites have no more control of the electorate. If they did, George Clooney wouldn't have gone 0 for 2 in the last election. Okay, George Clooney endorsed Joe Biden, took $36 million in fundraising checks, and then when they all cleared, wrote a op-ed in the New York Times going, by the way, Biden was out of it at that fundraiser last month. Now, he didn't say anything until all the checks had cleared, mind you, at which point he pivoted and said, no, you don't understand. Kamala Harris, she is the way and the truth. Forget that other guy.
Kamala's awful with her weird laugh. Ha ha!
And the guy went 0 for 2. Okay, Larry David finds himself in that same boat. He has endorsed everybody but Trump, and what's really killing him is that nobody listens to him. So he's going the shock jock route. Well, you know this guy is Hitler. But if he'd been paying attention the last 10 years, he'd realized that line was just as worn out as the rest of them, and he just shut his mouth because it's embarrassing.